They finally did it, guys. 4K capture on an external USB capture card. This is really exciting. This is the 4KX from Elgato. It's $230 and it was just announced recently. This was sent to me for review. I have no affiliate links or kickbacks or anything like that, but I do want to say that before I forget later. That was the only way I could, cover this and release it fairly close to launch date. So there's a lot to like about this, and there's some unique things that this has that even the other recently announced 4K Pro, which is a $280 PCIe card, that does not do some of the things this does. And this is less, and it's external. So I actually like this guy a lot. Now you get two braided cables in the box. One of them is a USB 3 Type-C Gen 2 cable, which is a really important detail because that supports 10 gigabits per second. Now this will work if your computer is a USB-C port that does not support that speed. You just get some more limitations in terms of frame rates and resolutions. And I'll have some charts in the video to help you understand where that fall off happens, because if you have a USB-C connection that is only Gen 1, you can do most of the stuff, but some of it you're not allowed to, of course, because at least on the capture side. And then if you have only USB 2, then you're stuck on the HD and you get no 4K support. So at least it works and it will scale with your system, but it's important and nice that they include that cable. They also include an HDMI 2.1 cable, which is braided, and it's actually a really nice cable. And they do sell it separately on their website for 20 bucks. So if you like the cable enough and you're like me and you tend to want things to match, you can always get that cable. At least it's not too much more than the generic ones on Amazon, and it's certified, which is really important when you start dealing with 4K 120, 8K 60, and with speeds and resolutions like that. Now, with this being an external USB-C capture card, they obviously launched an internal one as well that was also updated, and that one supports 8K 60 pass-through. However, the 4K recording is limited to 60 frames per second. So yes, the less expensive USB one that's external actually records at over double the frame rate as a peak, supporting up to 144. It doesn't mean that there's something necessarily wrong with that unit. There's just different limitations, pros, cons, that type of thing. So I'll have some links in the description below to help you understand which one does what, and I'll also have some charts in this video again to explain it. Now, Elgato did try to simplify this process to an extent to help you find what the right capture card is for you. They have a new tool or configurator online where they ask you a series of questions and then it recommends the right Elgato product. It's nice and it's commendable that they're doing this. I don't think the system's perfect per se just yet, but it is new, so I expect and hope for some improvement later. Just as an example, I'm capturing my Xbox, for example, and sometimes I'll switch to the PS5, and then it asks you, what are you capturing it on? And I say Windows, and I have a desktop instead of a laptop. Well, it's going to recommend the 4K Pro every time. This still works, though, on my desktop. I can use the Gen 2 USB port on the back, or I can use both the Thunderbolt ports, and it'll work just fine. I would have hoped that that tool would have recommended both and then just kind of explain the pros and cons of each. That's obviously a cleaner look with everything being built into this system. I don't have to deal with cables sticking out and all this other stuff. But I like the flexibility of recording at 4K 120 if I wanted to. So to me, I would have leaned toward this anyway. Now, I feel like everyone in life needs a yes man, someone that just gets you hyped and they say yes to everything. And I feel like the 4KX is kind of like that guy or gal. It just does a lot. And if you're looking or have a question of, does that capture card do that? It's more likely that the answer is yes than not, specifically with the 4KX. I already talked about the frame rates and resolutions and all this other stuff, but there's some other big wins as well. They kept the VRR that was on the HD60X before, which is nice, having variable refresh rate pass-through so your monitors can still behave as you'd hope them to behave is great. But it also supports automatic low latency mode, so if you connect this to something like an LG OLED, it passes it through, but your monitor or TV still need to support some of these features. So ALAM or ALLM is great because it puts the TV in gaming mode automatically, better suited for gaming. It also has HDR pass-through, so you can game in HDR and enjoy that content as well. But the kicker with this is Elgato also has HDR to SDR tone mapping, so you can play with HDR on your screen, enjoy all this beautiful content, but if you're streaming and you're not capturing and trying to stream HDR content because you have mixed content, and frankly that's a nightmare, especially if you're a Windows user, they have their own tone mapping algorithms inside and built into the software to help convert that picture down to something that's usable without doing all your own color correction and grading after the fact, something that was an issue on earlier capture cards in general, not just from Elgato, but from other brands as well. Now, on the note of specs and ports and all that, this has HDMI 2.1, like I said, and it is capped at 40 gigabits per second. Now, that's not a deal breaker because the PS5 is capped at 32. That's how Sony built it. And the Xbox is set to 40. So there's nothing that this will prohibit your console from supporting. So I just want to keep that in mind. It does not do Dolby Vision. So if you do have a Dolby Vision monitor, for example, it will not work. Or at least you can't enable it and use this even as pass-through. It just won't support. I suppose in a few years, maybe having the full 48 gigabit per second pipe will be handy, but as of right now, there's really nothing that uses it, at least especially on the content creation side. That's a pretty hefty requirement by today's standards. So another reason why I like this is kind of more of a selfish reason for what I do personally for content creation is I have a very large graphics card on my computer that takes up like 4.5 slots. So as a result, I only have one PCIe slot left. Now I'm using an Asus ROG motherboard that comes with an external or a PCIe case to hold 4 additional NVMe storage cards, something that I've been dying to do because of my content creation. I love the speed that that gives me in my production work. I haven't been able to use that card because my AverMedia GC573 is taking up that slot. It's the only one I had. I thought about like extensions and all that, but this solves it because not only do I get to capture and do more, now I can free up that card slot for my extra storage needs, so I'm really excited about that. This works on Mac, which is great, and then the other kicker is that makes it really portable, so if you're on the go, you can plug this into a laptop, MacBook or not, and still do your capturing. So if you're doing content creation at a party or you're covering something, LAN party. The other kicker though is this does work with iPad. They have a new app where you can plug this into the iPad to use your iPad as the recording and or streaming device. So if you're doing like a screen share from your iPad and you're connecting to this, or you're recording local content on the go, that's really nice for someone like me if I want to hook up my Sony camera to it and capture that footage as well. So the flexibility is great. Not only does it improve what you can do at home in your desktop setup, but now you have all these other versatile options that some people may not have thought about. The fact that you can use this almost like not a full-on field recorder because there's no internal storage, but an on-the-go device for all content needs, not just gaming, that has that kind of resolution and picture quality support is great. Now, if that's still not enough flexibility for you, I want to talk about EDID, or Extended Display Identification Data. It's basically a protocol that has your monitor or television tell the other device what it's capable of displaying. This is how computer screens work. This is how a TV communicates with your game console to tell it if it can support HDR10, if it can support VRR or 120 frames per second or refresh rate. All of that comes from the EDID. Now, this capture card and the 4K Pro both have pass-through. So whatever your monitor has for capabilities, this won't interfere with that and it'll pass that through, meaning you should have the same performance and capability that you had before. Now, there's a couple drawbacks or limitations with that can happen depending on your setup. So if your monitor or TV supports something that this doesn't, and this has a large range of support, but if for any reason it doesn't, there's another feature you can do that's called merged mode, which is a dynamic EDID function built into this that looks at what your monitor is reporting, what it knows it's capable of doing, and then it strips out everything that doesn't overlap. So if both devices support 4K 120, it will tell the computer or capture device, let's say you're plugged into a laptop, it'll tell your laptop that this can handle 4K 120. Or if you're recording or streaming from console, it'll tell your console that the monitor is 4K 120. So all of this helps with compatibility, and they let you adjust that using the Elgato 4K software. It's an incredible feature that can simplify things if you need it. Now, to make it even better, there's the option to ignore your monitor's EDID function entirely. There are a few occasions where that's going to be helpful. You are able to connect this to a Steam Deck, for example, or a Nintendo Switch. And if you're having display output compatibility issues, you can pick some of the presets. They have one for the Steam Deck. They have one for just 1080p. You can also do custom modes and tell it exactly what you want it to report. And the other benefit of this is if you have a gaming setup, let's say you have a game desktop and then a streaming computer, dual duty type setup, if the output of the machine is not being run back into another monitor, so let's say your primary computer, you take the HDMI out going into this for your streaming computer, but this isn't going back out to your monitor that you're actually playing on, you can then just set the EDID to 4K 60, for example, if that's what your streaming setup is, and duplicate your display or however you want to do it. So this is all just to give you more flexibility. That's probably not the best example, but you can see the power of this to make things work. It often is a huge issue for getting things to function the way you would hope. The other thing I want to point out in terms of setup is if you are capturing from a console, there is a feature that you have to disable on console called HDCP. If you don't, this won't work. That's just the nature of how HDCP works. And the reason why they have that is if you have a Netflix app on PS5 and you want to watch a movie, well, HDCP has to be enabled for the Netflix app to work. And by doing that, it's like copyright protection. So you have to disable that function. It's not going to take any functionality away from any of the games you play, but if you forgot to turn that off, this will not have any picture, and neither will your monitor because you broke the connection from the console directly to your screen. Now, I did test latency as well, and what I did was I put my camera into 120 frames per second mode, so I recorded at a higher frame rate. Both of these were set to 120 frames per second, and I had my console connected to the left monitor, or at least the output of this to the left monitor, and then I had the game capture preview on the right. And by recording at 120 frames per second, I was able to count the frames it took from when it changed on what I saw in real time versus what the input or preview happened on the actual capture software. And in 120 frames per second, the device was only 19 frames behind, which it sounds worse than it is, but when you're thinking at 120 frames a second, that equates to about 0.16 seconds, or like a sixth of a second. So it's really not that bad. It's not real time enough where you can be using this to play competitive FPS or even like a really hard, racing game or a sim where every millisecond of reaction time is helpful. It's not going to turn your laptop into a monitor for a console, for example. But it's not so bad that you're out of sync from your stream. That's something you always have to keep in mind when you have audio or video sources that are not in real time from you or something else. You have to do some manual alignment after the fact so everything kind of lines up. So 0.15 seconds, it's close enough where you really don't have to mess with any manual delay changes. But if you did, that's all you need to change. Now I want to talk about some special use cases as well. One of them involves PlayStation because Sony, in their infinite glory, decides to not allow two devices to have audio at the same time, meaning you can't use your headset at the same time HDMI audio is being used. And that doesn't matter if it's a wireless headset or a headset plugged into your controller. So naturally, when you connect it to something like this, which is capturing audio through HDMI, you have to choose if you want your stream to hear it or if you want your own headphone to hear it. That's an issue. So one option, and this is more for analog headsets, it doesn't solve the wireless headset issue, unfortunately, but you can, there's a cable online that Elgato sells. It's $20, it's a chat link cable, and what it does, because this has an aux input on the front, you can toggle this to be your audio source inside the Elgato 4K capture software. That's more flexible than just using it for PS5, but if you buy this special chat cable, what it does is it plugs into your controller, then it has a Y adapter where one output plugs into this, and the other cable is for your headset to plug into. That means the Elgato 4KX will capture your game audio plus your game chat as well into this device. Now it's all merged into one stream, so your control of the chat volume still happens on PS5, but at least it fixes the issue of not capturing audio from a PS5. The only downside is your microphone from your headset does not get passed into this. It's just the game audio or chat audio only. Your mic is only routed into the controller. And because of all this, that means you can't necessarily use a wireless headset. There is, however, one trick, and that's if you bought the brand new Astro A50X that just came out. That has an HDMI hub built into it, an HDMI box. And this is the craziest setup I've been able to conjure so far. So if you happen to own a 4KX and the Astro A50X and you want to capture audio on both, the audio that comes out of, let's say, a PlayStation will first go into this, the 4KX. The 4KX input is what goes to your PlayStation. The output of this is what goes into the input of your A50X base station, because this does pass through HDMI audio. The output of your A50X base station will then go to your monitor or TV, where that monitor or TV will no longer get sound because the A50X cuts it off at that point. So if you happen to have both and you're on the bleeding edge of the newest, best technology, if you will, of what's coming out there, there is a way to make that work with a wireless headset for PlayStation, and that is super cool. But that's obviously a niche use case. I just wanted to share that because I think if some people realize you can do that, that's something that hasn't been possible before. Now, a quick note on the chat link cable. If you have an Xbox, you don't have to worry about that because Xbox allows simultaneous audio with headsets and HDMI, so that's only specific to PS5. Overall, this unit's been great though, and it's so compact, I actually was able to fit it under my Corsair 5000D desk, or tower. So if you happen to have a case that's similar to that and you have a clearance, I'll put dimensions or height of this. There was a nice way of tucking it in underneath to be kind of like out of sight, out of mind, so I can still see the status light, and it put the aux cable right next to my console if I ever needed to tap that in as well. So it's a pretty slick device. I was blown away at how small it was considering all of this capture capability that it has, and it surprisingly ran fairly cool as well, even though it's a fully sealed enclosed unit. So I think this is great. I actually think the price is pretty reasonable as well, especially when you look at the competition and what they're capable of doing at their respective price points. This to me has just been an absolute home run. So thank you so much for watching. I know I didn't get into too much of the verbal technical explanation on certain things, but hopefully the charts and pictures kind of helped explain some of that. I'm more of a visual learner when it comes to those types of numbers, so hopefully that helped you as well. But that being said, thanks so much for watching. I appreciate your support. Don't forget to like and subscribe because I'd love to see you in the next video. I'll see you next time.